Hello everyone, I wanted to do a quick video on bone healing, basically when you've fractured or broken a bone and you want to heal it a little bit faster maybe, or on time even if you're a little bit older and healing is a bit slow. I have osteopetrosis, which mainly affects the mineralization of bone, and it over mineralizes, especially when calcium's concerned. And basically that's because it can't get rid of the calcium that wants to go back into the bloodstream to be gotten rid of because it's getting old or whatever the case might be. And so there's other issues that come along with that and the thickness of bone and stuff like that. But today specifically, I want to talk about what I do because I've broken quite a lot of bones and had even more fractures. So I tend to heal really well, always have done, always healed before time, and I think it's attributed to the fact that I look after myself, my nutrition, and the herbal medicines that I do. I'm not suggesting that anyone do any of this, it's just what I do, and hopefully it can help you in your recovery if you've recently broken or fractured a bone. The first thing that I do is make sure that my diet is good. I don't concentrate on this too much in the first at least 3 days, sometimes the first week, because you don't feel like eating much, especially if it's a bad break. And that's not always a bad thing, to actually fast for a little while, because it gives the body a chance to concentrate on healing rather than digestion. And so I don't concentrate, especially if it's a bad break, on eating too much in the first 3 days to a week, depending on the kind of fracture. And if there is concussion involved, like if I've hit my head in the same instance as fracturing something, I have actually fractured my skull as well. You don't feel like eating then anyway because of the concussion, so just lots of water is a good thing to be doing. And staying still for that first 3 days to a week, depending on how bad the fracture is, can depend on how long you need to keep it still for in order to stay out of pain, because normally once it's still and supported, it doesn't hurt as much. And that is the next kind of tip, I guess, is to try and keep it still for at least 3 days to a week, and then think about starting to move it, not putting weight through it but moving it. Herbal medicines, I use comfrey, which is, you're not allowed to sell it in Australia as a internal use product, so something you would eat or drink or take by mouth. Basically you can sell it as a cream or gel, which I also use, but I grow it myself and use it as an internal herb. And the reason for that is that it will help to knit the bone together. It has a really good action in that, and you can tell when you run it over with the lawnmower, it will actually heal itself and grow back even better. So it sort of shows you that it has that action where it can just kind of repair things. I have not had any issues with liver or kidneys or any of that taking it. I only take it short term, so I'll take it 3 times a day for the first 6 weeks after having a bad fracture, a serious fracture or break. And if it's not so serious, then I'll probably only take it for a couple of weeks, and usually I'm completely healed by then anyway. So just take it basically until I heal and then stop taking it because it's no longer needed. Another one that I use is yarrow, which is really good for keeping the blood clean. You want to minimize your inflammatory stuff that's going on. You don't want to have too much inflammation in the body, especially where the break is, because you want the blood flow to get to the break to heal it. If it's not able to get to the break because of the inflammation, it will delay healing, because it actually needs all of those building blocks that are carried in the blood, like calcium and other bone minerals, to heal the bone. Another thing to concentrate on is getting enough fats and proteins. Certainly you will need a little bit of carb as well in there, because you will need to have cellular energy to generate the healing. But having protein and fat is more important, because your fat minerals, fat soluble minerals, are vitamin D and K, which are to do with bone health specifically, but also vitamin E is in pretty much all your cells, so you're going to need enough of that and enough of vitamin A as well, and they're all your fat soluble vitamins, so you're going to need enough fats to transport those minerals to where they're needed, those vitamins I should say, to where they're needed. Good fats are things like avocados, fish, all those kinds of things. Cooking with butter rather than using a plant-based oil. Coconut oil is another good one that can be used, but sort of staying away from seed oils and things like that, because they turn into trans fats, and that's something we don't want to be consuming. And yes, coconut oil is technically a trans fat, but it's not quite the same thing. There's a lot of stuff behind that, and that could be in a whole video on its own, but it's just not the same thing. That's all you need to know for now. Taking fish oil is a good idea, because that's going to help with the inflammation, reducing it. Not obviously, you don't want to increase it, but it will help to reduce the inflammation. So taking a fish oil supplement is a good idea while you're fractured. It's actually a good idea in general, but especially while you're healing. And vitamin D is also a really good one. I tend to try and get it naturally from the sun as much as possible, but if you're in an area or in a season where there's not much sun, then taking a supplement is good enough to boost those levels and get your bones remineralized and healing nicely. Other good things to think about are high calcium foods, obviously, and avoiding high oxalate foods a little bit. You don't need to avoid them too much, but just not having too much of them. Don't go too heavy on the kale and things like that. You can have it. I'm not saying to eliminate it, just be a little bit aware that it does have some oxalates in it that will stop calcium absorption. So taking those maybe as like an iron food rather than a calcium food is a good idea. Things like chia seeds are good because they've got magnesium and calcium. Most seeds actually, nuts and those sorts of things are pretty good. Yes, some of these products have some oxalates in them, but they're not very high, so you should be able to absorb the calcium from those plant-based items. But obviously dairy is good, and I wouldn't discourage anyone from having dairy. I know that's like a controversial thing. As long as it's full fat dairy and as minimally processed as possible, I would encourage you to do that, because there is good calcium in it and no oxalates, so you're getting that calcium boost. But also focusing on things like magnesium. Again, they're normally in foods that have calcium anyway, such as like seeds, nuts, greens, leafy greens, meats and things like that as well. But also looking at like Celtic salt, because that has a lot of mineral, a lot of trace minerals in it as well. So, you know, concentrating on boosting those minerals is a really good idea as far as the bone minerals go, but also the other ones like iodine and those sorts of things, to make sure that the thyroid is operating really well. And you want to try and get them from food as much as possible. I don't like to recommend taking, I never take one because I have plenty of calcium, I don't need any more, but I kind of discourage the taking of calcium supplements, because they can have side effects, and you can get calcium in places where you don't want it, like bone spurs and things like that, plaque build-up and all that sort of stuff. It's just not necessary, I don't think. I think we can eat enough foods to get 1,000 milligrams of calcium in a day without having to take it as a supplement. But certainly magnesium is good if you can get the glycinate type of magnesium. That's even better because it's well absorbed. Don't even worry about getting magnesium oxide, because it's just going to make you want to go to the toilet. There's no point in taking that. You're better off getting it from foods. So that's kind of a little bit on the minerals and vitamins and fats, proteins you're going to need, because they're the building blocks for everything. Basically, all of your cellular life loves to use protein to make things and heal things and regenerate things and all that sort of stuff. So definitely getting at least 80 milligrams of protein a day, up to sort of 120 milligrams roughly, maybe a little bit more. Can't remember the exactly daily recommendation, but it is more than 80 grams, I think, off the top of my head. I can look that up and put in the comments what it actually is, but off the top of my head, I think that's about what it is. But at least making sure that you're getting that 80, around that is a good thing, because that will really help with the healing process. The next thing is knowing when to stop complete rest. So you want to rest at least for the first, like I was saying, for the first 3 days to a week. And then you'll start to feel a little bit better. It won't be as painful, it won't ache as much, and all that sort of stuff. I don't tend to put weight through the bone until I know that it's at least 50% healed by x-ray. So I won't put weight through it, but certainly moving it. So as much as possible is kind of what I would do with a broken thing. Obviously, if it's something like a rib or whatever, it's moving all the time anyway, which is not ideal. And that's why they take so long to heal, because they're just constantly moving and causing inflammation and pain. Because if you think about pain from the body's perspective, it actually is an alert, and it will create its own inflammation just on its own, as like a feedback loop, if you like. So the pain receptors will be activated, and they'll go, oh, there's a problem, and then that in it will cause a inflammatory response. So you want to kind of try and keep out of pain as much as you can. Obviously, with bad breaks, especially if they need to be have surgery done to them and things like that, you're going to kind of have a bit of a slower recovery in that. The pain is a bit harder to manage in those instances, because your body doesn't quite understand surgery. We haven't kind of grown in our genetic education, if you like, to understand that something's either been surgically removed or surgically fixed up. So sometimes it can cause more pain. It just depends on where it is and what it is. Actually, I think the least painful things I've broken have been my nose and my pelvis. The pelvis wasn't really painful, it just felt like I was going to fall over, like it wouldn't support my weight. It wasn't necessarily that painful. And it was broken quite badly. So I can imagine, didn't have surgery, but I can imagine that if I had have had surgery, the recovery might have been faster had I had normal bones. But I don't have normal bones, and so there could have been a whole heap of complications, and so I opted to not have the surgery, and it heals. I have complete movement. It healed up completely fine. I'm able to run and ride horses and ride bikes and do all the things that I could do before now. So I'm glad that I didn't have the surgery, but sometimes the surgeries can sort of slow down the healing process, because the body doesn't quite know what's going on, and it will send out more pain signals, and sometimes it can make it a faster recovery. It just depends on where it is. But if we're dealing with something like an ankle or a wrist, it can actually cause a lot more pain, and so then we're sort of looking more at more pain management, as far as like keeping it as still as possible, and as sort of doing hot and cold therapies and things like that. Which brings me to the next thing that I do, which is moxotherapy. Well, my husband does it for me, actually. I don't do it to myself. But if you can find a moxa therapist, it is amazing for getting the healing going and keeping it sort of firing along, so that the recovery is quicker. I've had a fractured toe heal in 3 days with moxotherapy. It wasn't a bad fracture, obviously. If it was a bad fracture, it would have been a bit longer, but maybe a week to 2 weeks, depending on how bad it is and where it is. But this was a toe, so they normally don't take that long anyway. But it was healed to the point where I could do everything I could do before without any pain in 3 days with the moxotherapy and the herbal medicine and the nutrition that I generally uphold. I generally keep a good diet and concentrate on those things for bone health, because I know that my bone health is compromised. So I hope all of that kind of helps for some of you that might be dealing with fractures or breaks or bone injuries, and helps with the recovery and a bit more of understanding of, you know, what's going on in your body and all of that kind of stuff. So basically recapping, I talked about fasting if necessary, if it's a particularly bad break and you really don't feel like eating, it's just your body telling you that at the moment we don't need nutrients, we just need to concentrate on using what we've got to start the healing process, and you don't actually have to eat if you don't want to. And then concentrating on minerals like calcium, magnesium in particular, but also the other trace minerals, concentrating on those to make sure that we've got enough to start the knitting and healing process of the bone. We talked about getting enough fats and proteins, because the fat soluble vitamins have a lot to do with the bones, and so we want to get enough of those transported to where they need to be to keep the healing going. And the protein is obviously going to build up cells and going to build up things to help the healing process along. So we want to make sure we're getting enough of those in the diet. We can have a little bit of carb as well in there for cellular energy, like quick cellular energy, because some cells are going to be compromised because of the injury, and so we want to heal those quickly so that we can get on with healing and get out of pain. We talked about a little bit about using omega-3 fish oils as an anti-inflammatory as well as a good fat. There's other anti-inflammatory sort of antioxidant things that you can concentrate on as well, but that was kind of one that was mainly mentioned for bone health. And the vitamins, vitamin D, K and E specifically. And we talked about moxotherapy and those sorts of like temperature based therapies to help aid the healing, and the use of comfrey, which is actually not encouraged in Australia. It can't be sold as an internal it can't be sold as a herb to be used internally. It can be only sold as one that is used externally. However, I take it internally and have not had any ill effects from that. I could do a whole video, I think I did actually, on comfrey and the things behind the controversies behind all of that. And yarrow as a blood cleaning herb to make sure, and it's also got quite a few minerals in it as well, but mostly as a blood cleaning herb, and a one to help with inflammation and things like that. And then moxotherapy, which I kind of just talked about with the heat, hot and cold therapies and things like that, is really good to help reduce the inflammation and pain, and obviously keeping it still for as long as it's sort of giving pain. When it sort of stops giving pain, then we're starting to move it, but not put weight through it, unless obviously there's other things at play and you're ready to put weight through it, possibly while still being in pain. It just depends on what is going on. But yeah, anyway, I hope all of that helps, and best of luck with your recoveries.